2021 edition of the Dakar International Forum on Peace and Security in Africa comes at a time when the world is grappling with the effect of the COVID-19 shock and new variants of the virus. It was an opportunity for African governments, policymakers, and international partners to explore solutions and readjust the regional security paradigms as countries in Africa aspire to build a more safe and secure continent for our economies to bounce back from the COVID-19 shock. I'm Kenneth Igbomo, and I'll be taking you through some key highlights from the Dakar Forum, as well as exclusive insights from the sidelines. So let's get straight into business. In its 7th edition, the Dakar Forum on Peace and Security has come a long way. The French and Senegalese initiative started in 2014, and since then, the forum tries to take stock of Africa's progress as well as assess the peace operations and defense architecture of the continent. Starting on a high, participants were welcomed by President Macky Sall, who made a charge for much-needed reforms.
Our meeting today is focusing on the very important theme, challenges of stability in a post-COVID-19 world. This, indeed, is a reflection of a positive on future. If the situation is improving in some areas, we have seen the advent of a new variant in some countries, and this reminds us that we are all exposed to the virus, and we have not yet reached the post-COVID period. This theme, indeed, is an invitation to be resilient, to be determined, and this we definitely need, knowing that we are facing a two-phase crisis, which is health and economic, and adding to this the specific vulnerability to climate change of the African continent, the renewed terrorist attacks, and the renewed military coups. Indeed, we are facing an emergency. In these destabilized countries, some are partly occupied and threatened in their existence. Lost lives, displaced people, refugees, mourning families, closed schools, and economies which are strongly shaken. Since 2014, the Dakar Forum is held to take stock of the situation in Africa so that we can provide our contribution to the search for solutions we are grappling with. And this is indeed the meaning of the commitment, participation of heads of states, leaders, and once again, I would like to hail high officials, ministers, experts, be they military or civilian, including international bodies, knowing that, as I said, protecting peace and security of this continent is our first and foremost responsibility. And of course, we would like to associate countries, partner countries and institutions in a spirit of collective solidarity and security, because we are sharing common responsibilities. I'm here thinking of the security challenge, environmental and health challenge, and I also think of organized crime, of piracy, cyber crime, migration, amongst other things. These are as many cross-border challenges that no single country can win the battle alone.
Also, visiting African presidents also made a case for the challenges the continent faces and how to rebuild a more secure and resilient Africa for the post-COVID-19 world.
COVID-19 is one of the worst global health emergencies of this century in terms of both its scale and speed and its impacts that have spread throughout the world and impacted and affected the livelihoods of so many people. The task facing us as African nations is to drive the recovery but a recovery that is sustainable, that is inclusive, and that leaves no one and no country behind. This is our bulwark against COVID-19, having negative long-term implications for peace and security on our continent. And believe you me, unless we deal with the after effects of COVID-19 effectively, they will impact negatively on our peace and security on our continent.
Security has no borders. National defense and security depends on the sub-regional and regional security context. And that is the basis of our concept of national security in Guinea-Bissau. And it is for this reason that we call on the international community and all nations to continue to support our efforts for security in the Sahel region as well as in neighboring countries and in Africa and the world at large. Terrorism in the Sahel region today is characterized by organizations that look like those that were found in the guerrilla organizations in South America in the 1970s. When I look at the intelligence reports with regard to the way they operate, I see a description of what reminds me of when I used to be at the university. I used to read the guerrilla operations in Latin America. The terrorist bases are organized based on the POCO model as described by Debray. And this model, you may remember that was not very popular in African movements, even nor with guerrilla wars in certain African countries, especially Niger, Cameroon, and other African countries. It is therefore surprising that this war model reappears 50 years later and has a technical success that is beyond expectations more than before. And this is all the more so that these terrorist organizations receive intellectual support that is not enormous at all. On the contrary, in the 70s, when the revolutionary movements were led by real political savvy people, whereas now that is not the case.
The African Union chairperson, Musa Faki Mahamat, paints the picture of how the threat of terrorism and instability is rising across the continent.
Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of peace and security, the times are very serious for Africa. From Libya, where you have exacerbated lust for power, to Mozambique in edge of southern Africa, the extremes that is the extreme of the DRC, the Lake Chad Basin, going through Chad, and also the various spilling over to Benin and beyond to Uganda, and in the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Somalia in the Horn of Africa, in the Sudan, South Sudan. Africa has never been so severely threatened by terrorism and instability.
The multidimensional nature of security challenges means for any amicable solution, the continent needs the support of its allies and development partners. In recent times, the semi-arid region of the Sahel has been threatened by increasing internal and cross-border security threats. Emanuela Claudia Del Rey, the European Union's special representative for the Sahel, shares with me how the EU is engaging Africa in this regard.
I think it's a very important moment in the history of Africa in general, and for the Sahel in particular. I say Sahel because I am the special representative of the European Union for the Sahel, and of course as the European Union has already stated many times, the Sahel at the moment is the most important area for a number of dynamics within the continent. In fact, as regards the European Union, I always say that the Sahel is the real southern frontier of Europe, and it doesn't mean that it ends there, but it means that from the Sahel starts the part of Africa which is very important for all of us, and therefore the fact that the Sahel is positioned as a sort of, let's say, area of control of all the traffics and all the dynamics within the continent, I think is very important. So when we talk about the Forum of Dakar, and talking about security and talking about peace, of course the first thing I want to say is that the approach of the forum was very correct, because it has put together the two major issues at the moment in discussion, which are security and development. For instance, for the European Union, which I represent, which means 27 member states who have been reflecting on this issue, the nexus between security and development is absolutely fundamental. And when we talk about development, we think about peace, definitely, meaning that we have to obtain stability, we have to stop violence, we have to stop the wars, and also especially terrorism and armed groups, to start creating sustainable development. This is very important for us, and this is why we are focusing very much on the nexus security development, and we are also, of course, in line with the approach of this forum, which was really quite unique, I find, very interesting, because it highlighted the good and bad aspects of the partnership between the European Union and the countries of Africa. Of course, when I say bad aspects, I mean the aspects that must be improved, must be changed for the future, because we are developing a new relationship which is based on a cultural revolution that occurred recently in the European Union, by which, instead of calling the countries of Africa third countries or developing countries, faraway countries, we have started talking about partnership. And this means that if we are partners, we have to work together. We have both the responsibility to work well, to obtain results, and of course, if in case of peace, to put all our efforts for this particular goal.
And from the Far East, Japan's ambassador to Senegal, Arai Tatsuo, also shares their cooperation efforts.
The peace and security cannot be solved just one by one approach. So you need a dimensional approach. So Japan has been engaged in long time for African development, including peace and security. You know, we believe that for African development and well-being of African people, we need, economic development and resilient society and peace and stability. With those three elements, yes, we can reach, a whole development of the society. This time we sent a delegation, but we have been engaged in, many areas, like, probably with Senegal, for example, we have started our diplomatic relations already in 1960. And in particular, since the year 70s, we have intensified our cooperation. So in all areas like economy, society, and peace and stability. And practically, Senegal-Japan cooperation is a kind of model for our partnership and ownership for partnership with Africa. Japanese cooperation is characterized by, the assistance for human resource development and the transfer of technology, because the human's resource is very important for the development, and also you need the technology to develop country and society. So with those two focuses, we have implemented many projects in Senegal and also in Africa, because those are key for development by the hands of Africans themselves.
The forum took a very holistic approach to assess the evolving nature of security threats on the continent, from plenary sessions capturing the nature of the continent's security challenges, where areas like the assessment of the rise of violent extremism were covered, as well as how insecurity affects development. They also assessed the impact of demography and climate change, and more specific areas like the maritime sector and the new challenges of cybersecurity. For governments in Africa, getting the right military-grade equipment to counter acts of terrorism is vital to win the war against insecurity. So what options are there for partnerships, and which models of acquisition are a best fit for African governments reeling from the pandemic shock?
I think the situation in Africa right now, just like on other places, is quite complex, and you need a set of various approaches. You cannot just go one way, so you need to engage at several levels, sort of a multiple tiers engagement from the top of a government or armed forces, until in our case, again, providing vehicles, protected vehicles, armored vehicles for the armies on the continent, and engagement until within the ministry structure, with the several officers in charge of defining their needs, in charge of operating the units, and in charge, above all, of sustaining in the duration, because this is a very important point in our views. We do not just provide a vehicle and then go. We stay. The government with which we will partner, we know they have other priorities, and especially, and perhaps it is the case in which the COVID situation could play a role, they will have to think first on the protection of the population for health care. So they will have expenditures for development. They have a lot of challenges, and all at the same time. So we are very aware that the portion of their budget that they could devote to military equipment is not necessarily that high or that easy for them to manage. They have, again, it's another kind of balance. So we, when we engage at a certain step, we also are in a position to find solutions for funding. We have basically two main models. The one model is when the situations where the international community is looking for troops contributing nations, typically for peacekeeping operations decided and partly financed by the UN, for instance. You could have the same kind of construct with the European Union as well in their peace facility for we call it neighborhood, but it's in fact it's the region. So in that case, we have a sort of financing engineering, and then it's a triangle between ourselves, the Ministry of Defense, which want to acquire armored vehicles for their troops to contribute to a peacekeeping operations of the UN and the UN. And we have this triangle, and we managed to be able to find a kind of partnering with finance institutes, banks, and so on, to allow for the finance to be a bit in advance of what the UN will subvention in the end. So we have this balance, and we can do it as well without international financing, so to say, through direct relations between banks or reassurance, a state, and our company.
Think tanks also play a vital role in helping to close the knowledge gaps for decision-making by policymakers. As brokers, they channel knowledge between scholars, policymakers, and civil society to get a clearer picture of how threats are evolving and how best to handle them.
For Expertise France, the French technical cooperation agency, this forum is very important. It's very important because it's a place where we can have a dialogue with the states, with the operationals, with also think tanks and people thinking about the issues of peace, security, stability in Africa, which is key today for the situation of the continent, especially in the post-COVID situation that we know. Well, we do have a lot of issues and a lot of actions within the African continent. We provide support in terms of technical assistance and implementation of projects to reinforce the public policies of the countries that we are working with in different sectors, from sustainable development, health, education, and also peace, security, and stability. And there's a continuum in the fragile situation between those different issues, because you cannot imagine the return of the state, the return of durable conditions of security without having public services, the state coming within the territory. So we are providing support for that. We are working with the partner states. We are cooperating with them. We try to be sure that our action is here for a long term, and that we structure sustainable policies for the future.
Now, I would say what is interesting in this forum is that it is quite comprehensive in terms of the significance of security. And it's sanitary, health-related security matters, as well as terrorism, obviously, especially because we are in the Sahel, which is one of the most troubled region in Africa today. And in a sense, climate changes as well create some threats on Africa. And it's a good opportunity to approach those issues on a comprehensive way. For instance, we have learned lessons of the struggle against pandemics, which are very relevant for struggle against public order trouble, terrorism. Why? Take the debt management in Africa, which I think has progressed in a sort of an unprecedented way in the last 2 years. Why? Because the African Union has gathered under the leadership of President Ramaphosa being the chairman of the UA. They have gathered their forces, and the negotiation for the debt management and funding of development, and especially development of healthcare solutions and so on, all that came from a collective negotiation. And one of the outcomes has been the distribution of the SDR, in French, the DTS, the special rights, $33 billion, so a bit more than 1% of the GDP of the whole continent. And with a negotiation currently to go up to 100 billion. So a bit more than 3% of the GDP of the continent, when we have been in a recession around 3% as well. So a good tool for recovery. This being not a debt, not something we have to reimburse where another, it is a right. And it is expressed in hard currencies. That could only be negotiated, and it has been done in a few days on the principle in April, May 2020. Absolutely impossible if we had not been a group totally consistent and acting together. And it's completely new in terms of continental governance.
Sometimes, to get a good grasp of the situation of insecurity on the continent, history can also help us unravel the intricacies of Africa's security challenges with the recent rise in unconstitutional change in government and the increase in violent extremism. With Libya as a case study, we can gain some insight around the circumstances that led to the 2011 revolution and the spread of insurgency in the Sahel.
Well, I think the first lesson is to learn what not to do. I think in Libya there was a lot of mistakes. Having the luxury of time that Libya has had over the last several years, the inability for multilateral organizations to come to an agreement, I think it still presses the same problem. You need to have multilateral agreements. Not a one-size-fits-all for the region, of course, or for the continent, of course, but agreements between states on how to best characterize the problem and diagnose it, but also how to prescribe a solution moving forward. For me today, the most important aspect is listening to what the average person on the ground thinks and how they've perceived and how they've felt this security challenge, because the use of language, for example, the best use of the word language, terrorism, has not gotten us any closer to a solution over the last 20 years in the post-9/11 world to actually solving the problem. The retreat, essentially, and withdrawal from Afghanistan is an example of how that's happening and its impact at a global level. But here in the continent, when you hear from people from across the Sahel, across West Africa, across the Maghreb, they're telling you that the repressive state is here. The repressive state with its military means is here, and that they need a protective state, a state that invests in human capital, a state that invests in human security, a state that looks to look beyond just the hard security elements and understands the drivers and the root causes of conflict. That's a great reason that we're here in this forum to discuss such ideas, to discuss such diagnostics and descriptions of the problem, but it's the prescriptions moving forward. I think we need to look at some of the hard facts. 5 million people at least that are now displaced within the Sahel. We have millions of pieces of weapons that are moving between the hands of this lethal nexus of local politics, organized crime, and Salafi jihadism. That we're no closer to being able to solve that, but forums like this, examples like Libya where those three things are interconnected dynamics, they're giving us an opportunity to look back at this and have an audit. What have we done over the last decade? Where have the mistakes been made? And I think the biggest mistake was not bringing in people soon enough that really understand and again have their finger on the pulse, because it's the people on the ground who don't use the terminology that we use in the analyst world, but they feel the effects and they will live with the consequences. So bringing them in at the center of policy making and decision making is such an important factor. And again, that's the reason we're here.
No doubt there's a need to strengthen regional and international cooperation to get the outcomes that we so desire for peace and security in Africa. I'm Kenneth Igbomo. Thank you for watching.